Oh, well, hello, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show, where I'm interviewing one of my friends, Trudi Lebrón, who wrote this beautiful book that just came out called The Antiracist Business Book, an equity-centered approach to work, wealth, and leadership. I have a very interesting conversation with Trudi. She's someone I've known for a bunch of years, and I've been following her work and learning so much from her. So I hope that you enjoyed this interview with Trudi Lebrón as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. I am super psyched to welcome my pal Trudi Lebrón to the show. Welcome, Trudi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I want to say big congrats on the Antiracist Business Book. This is your first book?
It is.
And how's it going?
Exciting. It's going well. I'm very excited. It's adopting author as like a new identity has been really fun.
Yeah, it's different. And we're both sort of in our maiden voyages as authors. And it's different than being an expert in other ways, right?
It really is.
Yeah,
it really is.
People need this so much, though. I was saying at the top of the show when I was, telling listeners and viewers about your background, how incredibly needed this is. I mean, it's been needed for so long, but I'm so psyched. It's so accessible. Like this book, if you have any interest in actually having an equitable and diverse business, this book is for you. So first want to ask you, listen, you've been doing this for a long time, but I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about sort of your background. Why is this what you do?
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest arcs in my journey has really been like identity exploration and integration. I grew up as a biracial child in the 80s, which was different. There was a lot of, even though I grew up in a community that was very diverse, there was a lot of trying to fit in, like what crowd I fit in with, like where I belonged. I didn't feel enough of one thing or enough of another thing. And as I got older, that story just continued and really kind of came into acute focus in high school when I had my first son at 16 years old. I was 15, or actually I had my oldest when I was 15 and then another when I was 16. And then layering on that identity of teen mom was really difficult. And the world has a lot of strong narratives that it wants to give you about what it means to be a teen mom and who you'll be and what it means of you and your children. And I wanted to understand that. And so I found myself in college and in graduate school, really trying to understand what we know about identity, what we know about marginalization. And of course, the threads led right into racism and oppression and the way that our systems kind of uphold those things. They can't be unlinked. And so, and I wanted to be a person who was both helping individuals who were facing different types of marginalization kind of overcome those circumstances while simultaneously helping people who hold power in these systems to interrupt it. And so that's how I found myself here.
So for you were on a particular path because that's such an immense, incredible responsibility to have children so young. It's like my mind is just blown at the thought of how the heaviness of that weight. So how did you change the trajectory of where it seemed like your life was going?
A lot of stubbornness and determination. And, again, I always say the things that got me into trouble when I was a kid were the qualities that helped me navigate, my life as an adult, unwillingness to just accept what everybody said as the truth and having, dreams and goals that were bigger than the reality that was in front of me, and having the audacity to believe that it was possible, right? Those were the internal qualities. And of course, there were outside, like external things that helped to kind of facilitate me getting to where I was, including that, I had a really great support system in my parents. I was really an exceptional student in college. Like, I was terrible in elementary school, middle school, and high school, but I was, I really enjoyed learning. And so it was an anchor for my life. It's something that I just kind of I just went all in on education as like the thing that was going to kind of get me out. Right. And so, even when I didn't want to, even when it felt like I didn't want to get out of bed or that I would never graduate, like that was like the most consistent thing in my life, from the time that I was 17 years old to the time I was 24. I was going to go all in on my education and on learning anything that I can and working hard, as an investment in the future.
But what like incredible foresight, because when you're in the minutia of doing that, it's so much work, and it's like you're right. That was an investment in your future, but it's like the day to day of slogging through school, working, kids. It's a lot to do. So in the book, you talk about understanding the long-term impacts of living in a hyper-capitalist, post-colonial world. So let's talk a little bit about those implications.
Yeah. So, we live in a world where so much of what we're told from when we're a child is that, we're supposed to grow up and be successful, and success looks this very particular way and involves, graduating, going to college, having a career, buying nice things, getting a house, or, like whatever those things are. And it sets us on this course where we're just accepting this status quo, like this cultural status quo about what success looks like and what people's lives are supposed to look like. And we're holding ourselves to that standard and other people, right? We're like, it's influencing all of the relationships that we have. And so we get on this race, and it's very, it's not often that we ever take the time to say, oh, is that actually what I want? Like, not only is that what I want, but is that aligned with what I believe? Are those behaviors like, if that is what I want, am I willing to do what is required of me to get it? Right. And when people slow down and start asking those questions, sometimes they come up with this like big no, like, oh, actually, I'm not willing to do the things that it takes to get there. Is there another path, or is there another destination completely that is more aligned? But we're not given a whole lot of examples of that. In our traditional schooling system, in the media, right? We're not given a whole bunch of examples for these other ways to be. And that's what's driving all of our interactions with each other and all of the choices that we make every day.
What's so interesting? It's so true. But what's so interesting about it is that the stories that I hear about people who do slow down, or my own story in life that, I was diagnosed with cancer and was working as a talent agent for supermodels and celebrities. And I was like, cancer was sort of a wake up call of like, is this what you want to do? Like, is this your dharma? Is this aligned with what you believe, which is what you just exactly said? And if the answer is no, and you've already built this whole career, which was my situation, I then was faced with this really painful but powerful pivot. Can I be poor again? Am I willing to do that? Because I didn't save it. It's not like I made a ton of money. I just didn't save any of it. So It wasn't like I was like, oh, I got this good nest egg. Not really.
Yeah.
But the question was, am I willing to shift and give up these things that other people think are cool and shiny and whatever, to pursue my heart's desire, or what resonates with me as someone who wants to add value and help people live better lives, which is what I really wanted. But it's such a powerful way of going at it from a business point of view too. It's not just personal. It's like, are what we're doing in the business are those actions aligned with our beliefs? So I think that's a really important part where a lot of small businesses, I don't think we ever, I mean, I have in the past 5 years, but prior to that, ever really go like, what are our values? What is our company value? Like, what do we care about? What matters? Yeah. What are the things that are most important? So can you talk a little bit about how people with smaller businesses can, like, what are the questions we need to be asking ourselves to have an anti-racist business, but really to be aligned with ourselves authentically?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that I think is the most important is getting really clear on what your core values are. Like, everybody has ideas about the things that they value, but when I work with clients, I ask them to really narrow down their top like 4 to 5, right? And really consider, if you only had to choose, if you could only choose 4 or 5 values that were going to be the things that you lived by, what would those be? And like allowing people to take the time to think through that and wrestle with that. And then once they have them, I will say this important distinction, to make sure that they're values that are true and not what you wish they would be or think they should be, because that is often what we end up with. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a company to do some consulting and, they're like, oh, we've done these values work. We've had such and such consultant help us, all these activities. And they have these values that are, that sound super businessy, like excellence and success, and which is great. I'm not, if that's the value, great. But when I really lean in and ask people to consider, are these what the values are and what you want them to be? Or is this what you think they should be because of the type of business that you run? It's almost all of the time that they identify a few values that are actually not the core values, but the values that they chose because they are either aspiring to them or think that good businesses have this, have excellence, for example, like as a value. Yeah. And so once people can kind of separate what they think they should have to what they actually believe, right? Mm-hmm. Then starting to have a relationship with your values where they almost could become like a mini board of directors in your company, that your values are having these board seats, and that when you make decisions, you're kind of checking in with those decisions against your values. And you're saying like, okay, if we roll this policy out, is it aligned with these five values? Or when you're problem solving, you say, if I were to solve this problem by centering this value of love or relationships or humanity or beauty or whatever it is, you start to get really different answers for how you make decisions about your business and how you work with your team and how you develop policies and practices. And what you end up with is, and in a way this sounds maybe a little over the top, but I do think it is the way to never make a bad decision again. Because even if other people disagree with you, or even if something doesn't work out the way you wanted, you can at least stand by the decision you made because it was true and in alignment with what you believe.
That is so liberating, right? Because
I think so.
I will have to agree, because even if something doesn't work out, if you go, but I'm on the right side of this. I had a supervisor many years ago when I was a young therapist, and I was like, I'm worried I'm going to do something. Yeah. I'm going to make someone hurt them. Like some mistake I'm going to make is going to be like deadly to someone, the biggest fears of like a young therapist. And she said, Terri, your job is to do no harm. And, do you hold your clients in high esteem? I was like, of course. Do you listen to and remember what they talk about? I was like, of course. She was like, basically saying, if your heart is in the right place and, then you're not actively doing harm, even if the thing doesn't there's not going to be a perfect way of being a therapist, but always checking in with, is your heart in the right place? And that's similar to what you're saying. Like, are you centering these things on your actual values, not on what you would like them to be, not positively projecting your values.
Right.
Right.
Or what someone told you you should do because it will work, but you didn't really believe in it, or it's kind of stretching maybe your moral compass a little bit, but that's what you felt like you should do. And then it doesn't work out, or it backfires, and you can't even stand by the decision because you were just, like you were just doing what someone else told you to do.
Right. So there's not that resonance there. So
Right.
You talk quite a bit in the book about not being anti-capitalist. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really important conversation to have,
Yeah.
depending on the business that you're in. Like, a lot of us vilify money. We want money. We've got this very complicated relationship to wealth and to the accumulation of wealth. So talk to us about that, would you?
Yeah. So, I started really diving in to capitalism, anti-capitalism, what these words mean, because I noticed this big resistance that not only that I had, but that like my mom had. I grew up in a home where the idea of making a lot of money was looked down upon, that people who had a lot of money were not, particularly well regarded. Right. And then also in an industry working in nonprofits for the majority of my early career, where you kind of have to buy into that idea of like, oh, we don't do this for the money, because there is, no one's like making a whole bunch of money, like when you're working in small nonprofits. So you kind of have to buy into that idea, that like, oh, like we don't need much, we just, it's all about like the work. Right. But then when as you learn more and you realize that actually there is a tremendous amount of money being exchanged through nonprofits and through foundations and all of this, I had to come to a point, especially as I decided that I was going to leave the nonprofit industry, start my own business, start a firm, hire people. I want to pay them well. In order for me to live my values, I have to have a company that, allows me to enact those values of like creating jobs that pay, people enough money, not just to live, but to kind of have, some comfort in their life. Right.
Right.
And we have to get in a right relationship with what we sell, how we charge, how we use money, etc. And so I found that I found it really difficult to get on board with a lot of anti-capitalist rhetoric and ideas, because anti-capitalist doesn't offer necessarily a good structure for how to do business or how to live in a way that that dissolves or like eradicates other forms of oppression. Right? We don't have. There's not a good model. And as someone who is anti-racist and who actively practices and teaches anti-racism, my primary concern, I think, from a social justice lens is racial equity. And so I don't see how I haven't come into good ideas, like a whole bunch of strong ideas for how to have an anti-capitalist society that also doesn't have, that still doesn't have oppression as a part of it. So what I do know, though, is that business is a way and commerce is a way to free people, right? I have found that to be true in my life and plenty of other people's lives. And capitalism is what allows us to create business. And so I have to reconcile, right? Like we have to kind of reconcile our relationship to this, because for as much as nobody wants to be a part of it, like if you live here in the US and use money at all, like you are participating in it. So for me, I'm much more interested in having different conversations about like the evolution of capitalism so that we still can have, the ability for someone to, and I say this in the book, start a t-shirt company out of their dorm room and pay their way through college. That is because of capitalism, right?
Right.
That's not possible everywhere. I know that's hard to believe, but the fact that that's hard to believe reflects the immense amount of privilege that we have, where we're like, oh yeah, it's just start a business and make some money on the side. That's not something everybody just gets to have, right?
Right.
So I think that being able to have businesses charge people, exchange goods and services, and build in, equity, justice, inclusivity, really centering people's humanity in that work is the way to get us to a place that is more equitable overall.
Right. And not toxic capitalism as you talk about in the book. It's more about healthy capitalism, which sounds like
right.
Like, does that go together? But it does.
Totally. And toxic capitalism being, all of those examples that we see all of the time where it's like, companies close down over COVID, they're firing people, they're paying big bonuses, millions of dollars to their CEOs and shareholders, right? People who say that they're for free speech and, and all tax credits and all these things, but they're anti-union and they don't want their labor force to organize, right? But they say that they want to create these inclusive, safe, just workplaces, but as long as there's actually no rules that say they have to do that. We just have to count on them being good people, right?
Right.
That's the side of capitalism that most people don't want to be a part of, but we can't throw it all away because we're looking at the worst parts of it.
Yes, I totally agree. So question, the main concepts, let's just say, of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, right? This is basically what the book is about. It's about people who are actually want to be actively anti-racist. You said one thing that was, I've heard it many times, but somehow it struck me in the book that it seems obvious, but I'm just going to say it, then I'm going to ask you to expand on it, that just being, not being racist is not the same as being anti-racist. It's not enough. Right. That's not what we're talking about. And that's not what you're talking about in this book. But can you talk a little bit about the main concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice? Is that too tall of an order to ask in one question?
I think I can break that down pretty easily, right? So diversity is about difference. It's about the numbers of people. Diversity is something we can quantify. We can count the people in a room and we can measure quantitatively the differences between them, right? And so the diversity is much broader than race, even though that's, especially over the last couple of years, that's how we think about it primarily. But diversity, we can have diversity in age and race and gender and identity and life experience and industry. I'm part of a networking group right now that's incredibly diverse, and it's racially diverse. But one of the ways it's diverse that I love most is that it's a bunch of women who are in all different kind of industries. And so when we get together to talk about business, we're not just pulling from an echo chamber of people who all work in the same field, right? So diversity is about difference. And there's tons of evidence that indicates that when we work in diverse communities and all of the ways that we can quantify diversity, we get better outcomes. We get better business outcomes. We get better life outcomes. We are more connected. So we problem solve better, right? Tons of evidence of this. But you only get the benefits of diversity when diversity comes with equity and inclusion, right? So for years, people did diversity trainings and companies, made a big effort to bring in more quote unquote diverse hires, right? And by that, they meant people of color. And what we got, and there's still evidence of this all over in industries all over, what you got is a bunch of people who hired entry-level workers who were people of color, but then all the decision-making power still exists at the top, right? And that is reflected today in many places. So so you might have diversity, but you don't have inclusion or equity or representation, right? Because that people are still segregated within the community. So equity is, so we'll go to inclusion next. So inclusion is about helping all of the people, all of those diverse people that you now have, that they feel like they belong, that they feel like they're valuable members of that community, that they are represented at all levels of the community, right? Which is something that we don't see as easily. And then equity is about making sure that people have what they need to be successful. right? So the biggest difference between equity and equality is that equality, everybody gets the same thing. Equity is that everybody gets what they need to get to the same place, right? To get to whatever goal it is that they're trying to get to. So that's why you hear diversity, equity, and inclusion often kind of lumped together, because in order to get the benefits of a diverse community, you can't do that without inclusion and equity. So for years, diversity, equity, and inclusion was the thing that people heard about most. And then in 2020, the word anti-racism, even though that's not a new concept, anti-racism became more centered, because anti-racism, unlike diversity, equity, and inclusion, is explicitly about disrupting racism. And I think that one of the ways that people understand this a little bit easier is that don't think of anti as not, like don't think of it as a replacement for not. Think of it as like, as in the word antidote, like it's the solution for, right? So anti-racism isn't about not being racist or rejecting racists. It's about the things that will cure, or dismantle racism.
Yeah. Wow, that is a really powerful distinction in understanding. And, even before 2020, when cancel culture was just blowing up on the internet and there was people being taken down left and right, this was sort of, there was this beginning, this inkling of at least people in the wellness industry, like looking at, what am I doing? Who am I doing it for? And of course, fear was one of the main driving forces of like, I'm not meaning to do it, not understanding that it doesn't actually matter. And I went through, just personally, I was like, I have to get first. I went through every single thing that every person who has all this kind of white privilege goes through, I think, of being like, I'm not racist. Like that's the beginning. It's just so offensive. All of this, right? The thought. And that was probably 3 or 4 years ago that I started on my own journey of actually being willing to go, of course you are. And what are you going to do? Who are you going to learn from? Who will you pay for their knowledge? And I'm so excited that this book is out there in the world, because you guys, the Antiracist Business Book, an equity-centered approach to work, wealth, and leadership by my pal, Trudi Lebrón. You don't have to ask anyone any questions. You can right now go to Amazon and buy the Antiracist Business Book. You want to know how to have an equitable business, do something that you want to be a part of the solution rather than deny the solution. This is a step-by-step process, Trudi, that you have at our fingertips now. So I want to say thank you for doing it and for spending a bunch of time with us today. But I so appreciate the fact that all of this information is in one beautiful little package with your face on the cover. So where can people find you? Where can they find any places that you hang out? Tell us, and what do you have going on?
Yeah, so I am hanging out the most these days on Instagram. So come hang out with me on Instagram. Send me a DM. I love messaging people on Instagram. So definitely come over and say hello. Definitely get the book. You can get it from anywhere that books are sold. We always want to encourage people to visit their local independent bookseller if you can. And support local books, because that is just tremendously important. Mm-hmm. And then, hopefully people will read it and be more interested and come and check out, some of the resources we have. We have a community called the Collective for Equity-Centered Business and Leadership. And for people who are newer on their journey, that's a great way to just start getting some support without making huge long-term commitments and big investments. We know that business coaching and things like that can be very expensive, but this shouldn't have to be. So we have a community where people can come in and ask questions and get support. So that's something that folks can do when they're ready for that step.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you, and we'll say to be continued.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.